Thank you all for joining us today. I'm here with Leon Barnard from Balsamic. Leon is one of our UX design mentors for our UX design workshop, and we're really excited to have everyone here today to learn more about the UX design process and just about the ins and outs of it. So while we're just finishing getting set up here, if everyone in the chat could go ahead and enter in where they're joining us from today, that would be awesome. I'm here in San Francisco. Leon is also here in San Francisco, joining me at Springboard's offices. So we're here together and we're excited to have everyone here. Feel free throughout the presentation today to go ahead and enter any questions that you guys have that come up through the Q&A. Or in the chat as well. We'll be monitoring that throughout the presentation. We'll be having a Q&A at the very end, so be sure to hang tight with any questions. And also, another important thing I want to ask, if everyone can hear me okay, and if you guys can see what's being shared on the screen. Cool, perfect. Perfect. Thanks, Kimberly and Anthony and everyone. And looks like we have a couple of people joining us from Australia, some folks from Colorado, Scotland, Texas, New Jersey, Canada, Costa Rica. Got people from all over. So we'll just give everyone another minute or so to join, and we'll go ahead and kick things off. And I'll hand things over to Leon.
Myself. Here we go. All right. Thank you, Julia. I'm really excited. Let's get started. So yeah, I'm really excited to be here. As Julia mentioned, I started recently as a mentor for the UX design course. I've really been enjoying it so far. It's been a great experience. A little bit more about me. I work for a company called Balsamic, which makes one of the more popular wireframing tools out there. I imagine a lot of you, especially if you're students, have heard of it. My background is actually in industrial engineering, but I did focus on human-computer interaction, and then I did UX design for about 8 years. And then at Balsamic, I mostly focus on writing about UX and wireframing. So what we're going to be talking about today is more or less split up into two main parts. The first part is intended to give you a better understanding of what UX is by talking about why it matters and how it's done. And then the second part is to help you as current or future UX designers become more successful at it. So I'll give you some tips I learned in my years working in the field, and then I'll present some links to tools and resources for you to learn more on your own. So let's start by talking about, why does user experience matter? I think probably everybody on here has kind of an intuitive understanding that user experience does matter. But I also think it's good to take a step back and kind of understand how and why UX became the big thing that it is now. So the first reason is I explained by saying that we don't really make most of our tools that we use anymore. So if you go long back in time, people made most of their own tools, or they used tools that were made by people who had done their job for generations before them. So think of a farmer or some other kind of, smith or something like that. But now most of our tools are digital, and we can design things that have never been built before. So we can build pretty much anything, and we're constantly thinking of new things to build. And if you look at the course of history, the pace is just so much quicker than it used to be. So this ability to make pretty much anything has led to something that's been called the commoditization of features. So features are often no longer the killer feature. There are a lot of products these days that offer basically the same features. So what something does is not always a differentiator. So it's no longer enough just for our tools to work. It's kind of raised the bar. We now expect them to work well. So overall, this is a good thing. It means it's progress as a society. But we also have so many tools that we use every day. And if all of them were hard to use, life would be really frustrating. So it's really important that they work well. so if tools working well is so critical, well, then why are they still so hard to use? Shouldn't everything be easy to use? Well, for all that we've evolved as a species, we're still not that good at communicating with each other, unfortunately. And this goes in both directions. So people are often bad at making themselves understood, and they're bad at understanding what other people say. So a lot of you have probably seen this example. Certainly, if you've worked in software organization before, this is a pretty cynical viewpoint, but it can also be kind of accurate as far as what communication in a software organization looks like. So this is really the result of this is poor communication. This image is basically to express how difficult it is to communicate the same thing to different parties. So going back to UX, I'd say that UX matters because having a person who's dedicated to translating the customer needs into something that can be built, it turns out to be really valuable in terms of productivity, commercial success, and general overall satisfaction. So UX designers help everyone, often including the customer, see the right thing to build. They really kind of make that visible for everybody. And this can really help with communication. So you could say that UX designers facilitate the transition from idea to delivered product. And I'll get into that a little bit more later. So that's pretty exciting, right? Everybody wants to be a UX designer. It sounds really cool. So let's start to unpack and digest how UX designers actually do what they do. So a lot of times it's broken up into roughly 5 phases. So I'll go through those 5 kind of core phases. The first step is product definition. It's sometimes also called problem definition, and I'll explain why. So product definition means finding a problem to solve. You don't want to start with a solution, even if it feels like the solution is obvious. Maybe you have customers who are just saying, I just need this one feature or this one solution, go ahead and implement it. It's always worthwhile to go ahead and try to dig a little bit deeper and figure out or at least articulate what the problem actually is. And you always want to start with the right questions. A lot of people think that the real work is done in the design phase, but I think that say 80% of the value that a designer adds is in asking the right questions. Everything is kind of easy after that. The rest just kind of falls into place. You also want to set the scope of the part of the problem you want to solve. There's this phrase, boiling the ocean, and I think that's often the trap that people fall into. Most problems, once you get into them, you'll find out that they're actually really big. So it's better to focus on a subset, a smaller part of the problem, rather than trying to solve an entire end-to-end problem. So the next step is research, and research sounds kind of formal and even scientific, but it doesn't necessarily have to look like what you think of as research. It can be formal, but it also doesn't have to be. So the gist of what research is all about is research is really trying to figure out a way to get answers to your questions. So it can actually be a creative process, since there's not always only one way to do it. It's up to you as the researcher to come up with a way to find out what you don't know about the problem. And there are lots of different ways to do that. So if you've heard of qualitative versus quantitative methods, or formal versus informal methods, those methods should really be dictated by the type of questions that you want to answer. And also a really important thing is don't forget to, in the course of your research, to try to find out whether it really is a problem or not. Or maybe it is a problem, but a lot of times people are perfectly happy with the existing solutions that they already have. And in case you don't believe me about the last one, this is a tweet that I just saw 2 days ago, actually. And the summary of it is that it's much better to find out now that something that your solution is not good than after you've built it. And believe me, this happens a lot. You spend a year or more building something, and then nobody buys it because you didn't validate that it's actually a real problem, or that people are looking for a better solution. So this is it's actually really important. So the flip side of research is analysis, which is phase 3. Analysis is really applying your research back to the problem. So it's the process of synthesizing, interpreting, and applying the results of what you've learned in your research. So this might be a report, it might be some summary statistics or some graphs or something, just something that helps you kind of understand what you learned in your research. So traditionally, design and validation are shown or kind of looked at as two separate steps, and those would be steps 4 and 5 in the process. But here I've decided to combine steps 4 and 5 because in actuality, it's really a kind of a continuous cycle of both. Really only at the very beginning and at the very end are they completely separate. So to show what I mean, here's an image and it shows the idea of a design funnel where you start with a lot of ideas and you kind of work your way towards the best one. So you narrow it down through the process of ideation and validation. And it's not just one and then the other. They're kind of all going on, both going on at the same time for the most part. So on the left of this image, you would have pure ideation, and then on the right, you have pure validation. But pretty much everything else in the middle is a cycle of both of those. I like this visualization a lot about refinement versus exploration. And kind of the reason why you want to approach it in this way. So it kind of shows why ideation and exploration are really important in the design process. And the thing is, you don't really know where you're going when you start. And that's a pretty cool thing about design and kind of fun too. But it's good to understand that it's not really a linear path. So if you are a designer, you have to have a good tolerance for uncertainty and not knowing. And that takes a bit of faith sometimes to not know where you're going, when you start. So to kind of summarize, ideation is really about generating as many ideas as possible in order to iterate towards better and better solutions. And you have to explore before you can refine. So make sure that you don't start refining too early. So like research, validation doesn't have to be formal and scientific. You'll hear the phrase a lot early and often in regards to validation. It's kind of a good mantra. You don't need or actually want to wait until it's finished to get feedback on it. And that means showing something to people when you're not really sure if it's any good. So you don't want to wait till the end. And it doesn't have to be a full moderated usability test. It can just be hallway usability testing, sending something around to the developers or some beta customers. And then maybe when you've gone through some of the informal phases of validation, then you can run a more formal usability test at the end. So it's really good to do a combination of both with more of the informal methods at the beginning and some of the formal ones at the end. So some of the techniques that have become established in the field are wireframing and prototyping, terms you've probably heard. And then both have what they call low fidelity and high fidelity variations. These terms are sometimes used interchangeably, but while there is some overlap, they're actually quite different. And I'll explain a little bit in the next few slides how they're different. So the difference is something like this, but not exactly. A wireframe is kind of like a blueprint, and a prototype is kind of like the scale model on the right, if you want to kind of break it down in really simple terms. Although, a blueprint is really more like a high fidelity wireframe, and the scale model would be more like a high fidelity prototype, but it's a good kind of high level approximation. In reality, it's more like this, so definitely a little bit more nuanced. So this is a graph that I made with ideation on the left and then validation on the right, kind of as a spectrum, and then the speed and fidelity going from the bottom to the top. Often there's a relationship between them. A lot of times it takes longer to make something that you want to validate than just to come up with an idea for something or the exploration phase. So the beauty of wireframes is that they can and should be done quickly. This also means that they can be iterated upon easily, and so when you want to make changes to them based on feedback, it's really easy. So compared to making changes to code or complicated prototypes, changes to wireframes are what they call cheap because they're easy to do. So if your idea is, but when your idea is advanced enough that you think it's ready to be released, then you want to have something that you can test or validate that you think it is actually ready. So having something that's close to the real thing or looks and feels like the real thing, but can still accommodate changes can be really useful. So that's where prototyping would come So that's kind of the first half, all about what UX is, and why it matters. So let's talk about the things that you'll learn and the things that I learned on my journey as a real UX designer. So remember back in the beginning when I talked about why UX matters and that UX designers facilitate the transition from idea to product. It actually took me a long time working as a UX designer to come to that realization. And when I did, it really reframed my idea of the role. And I think this is the most important tip. The other ones kind of follow from this one. A lot of times creating the design is the easy part once you know what to make. Your main job is really to create the shared vision and to help deliver it. Design is just a task. It's just a step in the process. So the more you can expand the definition of your job to include the things around the designing, then the better. So a lot of times that's the difference between, say, a junior designer and a senior designer. A senior designer is going to not just make the design, but really take responsibility for seeing it through to completion. So I think it's important to keep that in mind. This is another tweet that I saved a few years ago because I liked it. I'll read it. It's definitely an exaggeration, but it has some truth to it. Many designers act like their deliverable is all that's needed to have the real product manifest. It's really step 0 of a 100-step process. So that, I don't know, kind of hits the nail on the head as far as how you should be thinking about your work. It's not just about your deliverable or the design. The next tip is to work on your soft skills. So you can see that soft skills are really important for a UX designer. It actually seems to be one of the lessons in most jobs, actually. So the first skill is to have empathy, not just for your users, which is something that comes up a lot, but for the other jobs within your company. The developers, the programmers, for example, they have a real challenge taking a design and turning it into an actual working project. It's not just pushing a button and making something magic appear. And then the executive team or the product managers, they have real concerns about customers that they have to address, even if those things are not ideal for the end user. So you don't want to just dig in your heels and refuse to budge from your position. A better tactic is to learn the art of negotiation and diplomacy. So learn how to compromise, negotiate, and then also advocate for your design and the users. You want to look for solutions that work the best for everyone involved. And also it's really important to get to know the people that you work with, make friends with them so that they want to help you. They want to help realize your ideas. And then all of this requires a lot of communication and getting really good at communicating. So using whatever method works best, Slack, email, video calls, in-person chat, hanging out going to lunch with people, whatever, just get used to communicating. This is a quote that I like that kind of speaks to this. Your ability to be thoughtful about a problem and articulate any solution is more important than your ability to design the perfect solution every time. This is from a book called Articulating Design Decisions by Tom Griever. Basically, it's saying that if you can't explain the problem and how you're proposing to solve it, then you're really missing an important part of your job. This is an image from another book called Storytelling for User Experience. And the point here is that you can do a lot more than just send your design over the wall to the team next to you. You can add a lot of value to it by sharing it and explaining it to others, and by making it into a story. So you should learn to get comfortable talking about your design and using your designs to tell a story about the problem that you're actually solving. You have to make people care about it and explain what the problem is and why people should care about solving it. So the last tip is what I call optimizing your deliverables. So once you're on the job, it's not about your portfolio anymore. It's not about making something that looks flashy or pretty. Really, you want to focus on whatever it is that gets the job done best. So pretty polished designs aren't always the best choice. And you don't want to add any more detail than is necessary because time is always at a premium. So over time, you'll learn to become more efficient in the types of artifacts that you create. So there's something called the Agile Manifesto, and has a really good line about maximizing the amount of work not done. And I think that's really important to consider, is that, if it's not adding value for anybody, don't do it. even if you think that you should. Here are two examples that I like a lot, especially this first one on the left, because it's not in the software field. So it's a very simple sketch with some words on it, but you can kind of get a feel for how much information is actually communicated in this. It's really very useful. So it uses some visuals to convey the big picture, and then it uses annotations and some text to kind of fill in the details. So the assumption here is that the person writing it is not necessarily the expert about making the close, but they're the ones who kind of knows specific details about how the end product should look. So it's the same thing with the wireframe on the right. So very high level, low detail sketches kind of give the big picture of what's being made, and then some annotations to fill in the details. So it doesn't have to be fancy or visually impressive to be useful. This is kind of another way of looking at it. So plotting some common deliverables that you might do in your UX design role on a graph, it can be kind of useful like this. So here are some of the deliverables that you might create. So in the upper left, you have functional specifications, which are mostly all text and very, very detailed. And then on the the upper right, you have things that are very visual, like these kind of comprehensive pixel perfect designs, or really high fidelity prototypes that are very visual and have a lot of detail and have taken a lot of time to create. And then you have so wireframes are a little bit closer to the middle, where they're visual but not as visual, and they're not quite as detailed. And the amount of detail usually corresponds to the amount of time it takes to make. And since humans are visual creatures, being more visual is generally better than less. So here's another way of looking at it, and just thinking that you really want to find kind of that sweet spot where you're providing the most information with the least amount of effort, where it doesn't take you too much time to make, which is respectful of everybody's time, your time, and so that the other people don't have to wait for you to spend weeks building something that's pixel perfect, yet also provides a lot of information. So in my experience, that sweet spot is somewhere kind of close to the middle of this graph. That's where you're getting the most, say, ROI, or return on investment for your effort. And the more experience you have, the more you're able to shift towards more output with less input. So here's some examples from some of my work that I've done in the past. And these are Agile user stories with a wireframe in them. And that's kind of been the sweet spot for me. So, the wireframe and the story summary at the top give you the big picture, and then the acceptance criteria below give you the details. And for me, that was kind of a good balance of showing versus telling, because some things are easier to explain in pictures and others are easier to explain in words. So you want to find the right mix. So those are kind of my tips for success that I learned in my years working as a UX designer. So let's talk about what you can do to learn much more about becoming a UX designer. So the first one is this free learning path that Springboard has on their website. It goes way, way deeper than I was able to go in here today. Some of the things you'll learn are like design research methods, user-centered design techniques, which I didn't talk about at all, interviewing people in real-world situations, which is kind of an art in itself, creating personas, which is also very useful, and then all about the deliverables that a UX designer can make. Some of the examples that I showed. And then, of course, there's the full UX design course at Springboard, the one that I'm a mentor for now. As you can see in the bullet points, there's a lot of projects that required as part of it. And I think that's a really great way to learn from what you're reading and watching. And really the best way to find out if you understand something is to do a project where you actually have to apply it. And it says that, at the end of the course, you'll be ready to apply for entry-level jobs. And, I'd say that's definitely the case with the people that I've been mentoring. Some of them are getting ready to apply for jobs right now. And I think that they're very, very qualified. And I think going through the course and being able to build a portfolio off of it, I think is really, really, really useful. So finally, a tiny little plug for my company. If you're looking for a good wireframing tool, I think you should check out Balsamiq. So we have a new web version out that's really good. You can try it for free for 30 days at balsamic.cloud is the website for it. And this is what it looks like. It's just kind of a drag and drop editor, really easy to use, where you can just kind of build the UI, yeah, like I said, by just dragging and dropping. Yeah, it's really easy to use. This is the website for signing up at balsamic.cloud. And now I think we're ready for some Q&A.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Leon. That was a really, really wonderful presentation. One of the things that stood out to me was about the soft skills that you covered that can be really helpful in helping you become a better UX designer. Oftentimes that we've seen when we have prospective students coming to us is that there's a really strong focus on the technical skills aspect of being a UX designer. So it's really, really great to see you highlight the soft skills, because those are equally as important. So we wanted to open up the presentation today to take some questions for everyone. And so feel free to go ahead and submit them in the chat or submit them in the Q&A, and Leon's gonna answer them. So one of the first ones that we got from Mei Shin is how best to land a first job as a UX designer if your major is in computer science. But to open that up, how would you go about landing your first job as a UX designer if your background is in something unrelated?
Sure, and this question comes up a lot, and it's not an easy question to answer. It's much easier once you've gotten that first UX job to get all your subsequent ones. But getting that first one is really hard. But the good thing about UX is that it's relatively new as a discipline. So when I was getting into UX, more than 10 years ago, it was very hard to go through any kind of UX design training program or have any kind of certificate or degree that said UX on it. And so people were coming from all different fields and just finding their way into it. So my background is in engineering. A lot of people had backgrounds in graphic design or psychology, some more technical. I worked with one guy who majored in forestry and made his way into UX, and he was a very good UX designer. So I think the good thing is that there's not this expectation that, say if you want to be an executive, that you have to have an MBA or something. So, you don't necessarily need a 4-year degree in UX. You can go through a lot of these certificate programs. Just something that says that, hey, I've spent time learning these concepts. And I think having something to show for it, so having some kind of portfolio is really important. You have to be able to talk about UX, but if you're going to apply to jobs, you're going to have something that people can look at, even if it's just a single case study. So finding a way to do that. And so even if you have a background in computer science or something else, it doesn't preclude you from being able to do UX work. So whether it's doing some kind of a freelance project or kind of your own redesign or something as part of a course, I think you have to have something to show, but you don't have to be a UX expert in the beginning to do that, because you're going to learn a lot on the job.
Awesome response. And I think that also kind of answered one of the other questions that we just got from, sorry if I mispronounced this, from Chaitra on how can a software engineer leverage their skills as a UX designer. But the next question that we have from Tatiana is, Leon, what would you say are your biggest struggles with user interviews?
With user interviews, I think people are kind of going back to what I was saying about communication. People are not that good at communicating. There's this quote, was it Henry Ford? If I had asked customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. So people have a very hard time talking about things that they can't imagine. And on the other side, the interviewer, it can be difficult not to lead them in the direction, to have this confirmation bias. So one of my favorite research techniques is actually like ethnographic research, or something called contextual inquiry, where you just sit with somebody doing their job and you just watch them do their job. And maybe you'll ask them some questions about why did you do it this way or something like that. But I think you can learn a lot by watching. And I think if you only rely on what people say, you might be missing something, because a lot of times people, their behavior is different than what they say. So I think one of the big challenges is just making sure that you're getting the right picture. So I would say, unless it's purely something like a survey, I would say just do something to try to validate your findings when you're interviewing people. Do something that can just back it up in your own observation or your own experience.
Awesome. And another one that we got from Hakeem is, what's one thing you wish you knew when you were starting out in UX?
I think it was a lot of the stuff that I talked to in my tips. I really thought that my job was going to be coming up with the best design. That was going to be the measure of my success, was how good my designs were. But I actually my very first job was at a company that had a UX team, but that team really kind of didn't have buy-in from the rest of the organization. So we had a library of designs that we had created that our designers were all really proud of. And then when I looked around at the product, I saw hardly any of the work that we had done actually in the product, aside from maybe some icons. So the developers basically thought that we were just a visual design team. And when we presented these great designs that would have been fantastic for the user, they said, oh, that's going to take me 3 months to build. I have 2 weeks. So, focusing on the design itself, primarily, I think was my biggest mistake in the beginning. And I wish I had known to just go and sit in on the meetings about the product and go talk to the developer and see what they're working on and say, hey, can I help you with that? Rather than starting with this vision of the perfect ideal design. So kind of working from a bottom up or kind of a on the ground approach, and thinking about the people who are actually involved, the people who are making it, and kind of getting on board with them first, rather than just isolating yourself off into the design team and kind of living in your own little corner over there.
Awesome. And following up to that question, where did it go? I just saw a question about sort of what does a day-to-day in your role look like? Are you sitting down at your computer most of the time, working away, or what other types of stakeholders at your organization do you typically find yourself working with on a project?
Yeah, it really depends. So like I said, that first job, I was sitting with the other designers, and we were kind of had our little design area in one corner. I worked at another job where it was an agile development environment, and they really bought into agile, and we were kind of all in this war room together, where there was me, a UX researcher, 3 developers, and 2 quality assurance people. They were all sitting in the same room, basically at one table every single day. And so everything was divided up by product, basically. So I hardly even talked to the other designers, except for maybe a weekly meeting. It also depends on the type of design role that you have. If you're something more of a UX researcher, you're going to be doing more work talking to people on the phone, maybe doing a lot of traveling. Because like I said, a lot of the ethnographic research is best done at the customer site. So I think it's really great when companies give budget for researchers to go and actually meet with real customers and observe them. Or maybe doing usability studies or something like that. So if you're a researcher, you're going to be out more. For the most part, you're sitting at a desk using design tool part of the time, and then communication tools part of the time, so email and Slack, and then some kind of project management tool, which is also a form of communication to know what other people are working on, and so that other people can know what you're working on. Yeah, so I think that's how I would answer that question.
Great, thanks, Leon. This one, hopefully, is a easier question. So Lana said, great presentation. She's joining us today from London. And she was curious if there was a book about research that you recommend to people as just awesome for getting research techniques down when it comes to user research.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've read one. I have bookmarks with a whole bunch of my favorite books. I know that there is one that's been circulating, which I haven't actually read. I think it's called Just Enough Research. And like I said, I haven't read it, but I love the title. But one that stands out to me from my history is this entire book on contextual inquiry. The author, I think, is Karen Holtzblatt. And that one it's not really a survey of user research techniques, but it's really a deep dive into one specific one and kind of an ethnographic approach. And that was really kind of mind-blowing to me, that just how much you can learn just by sitting and watching people. So it's not, like I said, it's not really going to give you a lot of breadth, but it's going to tell you a lot about how to do one particular technique really well.
Great, thank you for that recommendation. Another question that we had, I'm going to kind of couple up a couple of questions. So related to UX boot camps and online learning versus in-person learning, and being able to get the most value out of a boot camp, how would you recommend going about that? And then a secondary question to it is, what skills do you think are key to learn first and have in addition to a UX design portfolio?
Important to learn in order to have a UX design portfolio?
In addition to.
In addition. Yeah, it's hard to say because I haven't gone through all of the boot camps. I know that this is a frequent topic in a lot of the forums. There's like a UX section on Quora and Stack Overflow and a bunch of other ones where people will kind of give you their personal experiences with these programs. I'm only familiar intimately with the Springboard one, which does a really good job of covering all the main things without taking too much time. So it's really hard to say. It also kind of depends on the person, whether you're good at learning on your own. I mean, I think the presence of a mentor in the Springboard one is really, really important. I think a lot of people it would be much harder to stick with it if you didn't have somebody checking in on you once a week. And then other people, just learn better by having a classroom and having other students in the room with them and learning that way. So I really can't say, which one is best, because obviously the answer is, it depends, and it depends how much time you have and how much money you have and things like that. But having a portfolio is really good. I think one of the tricky things is that a lot of the people who are hiring for UX roles don't necessarily know what to look for. So I think it is unfortunate, especially people who are going into the research side, that people want to see a really nice looking portfolio. And kind of if you picked up on that from my presentation, that I don't think that's necessarily what makes you a good UX designer. So I mean, there are some good, I would say, find out how to market yourself. It can feel kind of gross to try to make yourself look really good and really slick, but it's a skill you're going to have to learn at some point anyway. So send your portfolio out to as many people as you can, and try to get as critical feedback, as honest feedback as you can. One mistake I see people doing a lot is not really applying the UX process to their own portfolio. So because you're so invested in it, you think that somebody actually wants to take the time and read the whole thing, even though when you're looking at somebody else's design, it's easy for you to see that there's unnecessary information in there. So I would say for most people, take out half the text and really put the good stuff up front. Don't make people, there's that book, Don't Make Me Think. And so I would say don't, apply that line of thinking to your own portfolio. So just, give me the good stuff. If I am somebody, a hiring manager, show me the most important things right away. and don't assume that I have time to spend 15 minutes looking through everything on your portfolio. So there's kind of, I guess it's kind of a self-marketing or self-promotion skill, because there's so many people applying, and you have to find a way not just to prove that you have the minimum qualifications, but to actually stand out. So that requires a little kind of a different perspective. And so I think it's really good to find somebody who can give you honest feedback on what you're presenting to the outside world.
Definitely great feedback on that. And that's something we have a lot of people ask about, is about building a portfolio and all of the different elements to include. And Leon, I think, definitely hit the nail on the head with his answer about the importance of having a really, really sharp portfolio and being able to properly brand yourself. So we're coming up on time here, so we'll go ahead and take just one more question. There was one that I saw floating around a couple times from a few different people. So one of the questions is regarding the importance of knowing coding. Is it necessary to know basic coding skills? If so, like, what language should you learn? And is it really important in landing, your first role as a UX designer?
Yeah, that's also a really good and common question. And it's kind of similar to the other ones in that the skills you need to get a job are not necessarily the same skills that you need to be successful in a job. And things are definitely changing these days, so there's that to keep in mind. 5 years ago, I don't think there was much of an expectation that you would know any coding, but these days it's becoming a little bit more standard, I think. So my personal point of view is that if you're working on any product that is web-based, so it can be a commercial website or a web application, and a lot of them are these days, to have some familiarity with HTML and CSS. And that's not one of the sexy programming languages that a lot of companies recommend. But if a company is making a web application, HTML and CSS and JavaScript are the only languages that a web browser knows. So if they're writing something in a language like React, all that React is doing is writing HTML. It's just a more efficient way of writing HTML. So if you can write HTML, you can actually read a React file and kind of understand what's going on. And just in a personal anecdote, I found that one of my keys to success in the past has been knowing CSS, because in my experience, developers hate CSS. It doesn't feel like a real programming language to them, and they hate writing it. So I made many a developer happy by writing the CSS code for them, so they didn't have to Google it and figure out how to do it, because they love the real coding, the heavy lifting stuff. They hate that kind of visual and front end stuff. So I think the more you can do, the more you have familiarity with these kind of lightweight coding things, that's what will make you successful. As far as, and I don't think you should have to know coding to do your job. It really depends on what your role is. I think it can be useful if you have, like I said, some familiarity, but I don't know if I really believe in this idea of kind of a unicorn designer that does a bit of everything, because I don't think that it's hard to be really good at all the things. So, but then again, some of the people hiring may have a different idea in mind and may think that they want somebody who can do everything. But it may be up to you to kind of convince them that, no, I'm really good at this one thing, and I know enough to be conversational on the coding side of things. But I don't think it should really be a big selling point if you're pitching yourself as a UX designer. Yeah, that's my kind of very biased personal opinion.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Leon. And thank you to everyone who was able to join us today. We appreciate you taking the time out of your day to be here. And I also wanted to let you guys know, it's a question that also comes up a lot, that we are recording this, and we'll be sending out the replay later on this week to everyone who attended today and everyone that registered, in case you missed anything or wanted to watch it a second time. So keep an eye out for that. And thank you again for taking time out of your day. And thank you, Leon, for being here. We appreciate your you taking time to share your expertise in UX design.
My pleasure. It was fun.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.